The hall was glowing with lights, music, and laughter. Rows of white chairs lined the aisle, fresh flowers hung from golden stands, and every guest had their eyes fixed on the bride and groom standing at the altar. It was the kind of wedding you only see in magazines. Perfect, glamorous, unforgettable. At least, that's how it looked on the surface. I was there that day, standing quietly in the background, dressed in black and white, holding a tray like I had countless times before. To most people, I was invisible, just the waiter, just another face blending into the celebration. But I knew something no one else in that room could even imagine. And because of that, I also knew this wedding wasn't going to end the way everyone expected. From the very beginning, something felt off. The bride was stunning, no doubt, walking down the aisle with her veil trailing behind her, every eye locked on her as if she were royalty. But even through her perfect smile, I noticed something in her eyes. Fear. It was subtle, hidden behind all the makeup and confidence, but I caught it. I knew that look. I had seen it before, up close, in a way no one else here ever had. The groom stood tall in his tuxedo, smiling proudly at his bride. But his smile seemed forced. His hand trembled just slightly when he reached for hers. Guests saw a beautiful couple, two people about to start a new life together. But I saw something else. I saw two people carrying secrets too heavy to hide forever. As the officiant began speaking, I moved silently around the edges of the hall, refilling glasses, setting plates, pretending I wasn't paying attention. But every word, every vow, every look between them burned in my mind. They had no idea that I was there not just to serve, but to watch. Because this wedding? It wasn't built on love, it was built on lies. I remember the laughter of the guests, the way they leaned in to whisper about how perfect the bride looked, how lucky the groom was, how flawless the event seemed. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them they were watching a performance, not a marriage. But I stayed silent, my grip tightening around the tray in my hands. And as the vows began, I felt my chest tighten. The words, forever, honor, truth, they sounded like poison. Because I knew that behind every promise stood a history no one else knew. A history I carried like a scar. Every time the groom glanced out into the audience, his eyes darted nervously, like he was terrified someone would stand up and stop it all. And every time the bride smiled, it felt less like joy and more like control, like she was desperate to keep her perfect image intact. I kept asking myself, how long will they keep up the act? How long before the truth bursts out? And then, as the officiant's words echoed, I realized something. Maybe that moment was supposed to be me. Maybe I was the one meant to break the silence. But I hesitated. My heart raced, my mind screamed, but my body froze. Because once I spoke, there would be no going back. The world they had built, the fantasy everyone in that hall believed, would shatter instantly. I looked at the bride. I remembered the nights, the conversations, the promises she once made to me. I remembered the betrayal. I remembered how easily she had left me behind for the man now standing in front of her. And I looked at the groom, the man who had known, the man who had chosen silence, the man who had built his future on something that wasn't his to claim. My jaw clenched, my hands shook, my chest felt like it was on fire. I couldn't hold it in much longer. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a stage, and I was about to ruin their play. The music softened, the officiant smiled, the guests leaned forward as the vows drew closer. And in that moment, I knew. The truth wasn't going to stay buried. Not today, not anymore. Because I wasn't just a waiter, I wasn't just an extra in their story. I was the one holding the match. And the fire was about to start. The room grew quiet as the officiant opened his book and began the vows. The chatter of the guests, the clinking of glasses, even the sound of the air conditioning seemed to fade into silence. All eyes were locked on the bride and groom. The bride stood tall, her gown glowing under the soft lights, her veil perfectly draped, her smile rehearsed 1,000 times. She looked flawless, too flawless, almost like she was afraid even a crack in her expression might expose something deeper. The groom, on the other hand, looked pale. His fingers twitched against hers, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. On the outside, he was supposed to look strong, confident, ready to promise forever. But up close, he looked like a man carrying a secret he didn't know how much longer he could hold. The officiant's words echoed through the hall. "Do you take her, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live?" The groom hesitated. It was just for a second, but I caught it. His eyes flicked to the audience, searching, nervous. His lips parted, but the word wouldn't come out right away. The guests chuckled lightly, thinking it was nerves, the kind every groom feels. But I knew better. That pause wasn't about nerves, it was about guilt. Finally, he forced it out. "I do." The room erupted in smiles, sighs, and even a few claps. But I didn't smile. My grip on the tray in my hands tightened. Because to me, those two words didn't sound like a vow. They sounded like a lie. Then it was her turn. The officiant turned to the bride. "And do you take him, to love and to cherish, for as long as you both shall live?" She didn't hesitate, not even for a second. Her smile widened, her chin lifted, and her voice rang clear. "I do." Her voice was steady, but her eyes told a different story. They were sharp, almost daring, like she was staring down the truth itself, daring it to speak up, daring me to speak up. And in that moment, our eyes met. Just for a second, she glanced my way. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes locked on me like a blade, a silent warning, a silent threat. It was her way of saying, "Don't you dare ruin this for me." But that look did the opposite of what she wanted. Instead of silencing me, it ignited the fire inside me. Because in her eyes, I saw the same arrogance that had destroyed me once before. The belief that she could control everything, that she could bury the past forever, that she could erase me from the story. But I was still here, standing in the shadows, watching, remembering. The officiant smiled warmly, ready to pronounce them husband and wife. Guests leaned forward, cameras raised, waiting for the kiss, the moment that would seal their picture-perfect day. And in that instant, I knew I couldn't let it happen. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. My palms sweated against the tray I held. My throat tightened with words that had been locked away for too long. I wasn't just deciding whether to speak. I was deciding whether to destroy their perfect little fantasy in front of everyone, to tear down everything they had built on lies. I could hear my own thoughts screaming inside me. If not now, when? If not you, who? The officiant's voice grew louder, final, almost triumphant. By the power vested in me. And that was when I felt my lips part. I didn't plan it. I didn't rehearse it. It just spilled out, cutting across the room, silencing the hall in an instant. "Wait." The word echoed like thunder. Gasps filled the room. Chairs creaked as guests turned toward the voice. The bride froze, her smile snapping in half. The groom's head whipped around, his face draining of color. Every eye in the room was on me now. The invisible waiter. The background character. The man no one was supposed to notice. Until now. I took a step forward, my tray shaking in my hands, my voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "This wedding can't go on." The room erupted in chaos. Shocked whispers, confused cries, angry gasps. The officiant stammered, lost for words. The bride's face twisted into fury, and the groom stood frozen, paralyzed with dread. And me? My heart was racing, my body shaking, but my voice carried the weight of years. Because the truth was about to come out. And nothing, no threats, no lies, no perfect white dress, was going to stop it. The word wait still echoed through the hall when silence crashed down like a hammer. For a second, nobody moved. It was as if time itself had frozen, holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Every guest turned their head in my direction. Hundreds of eyes locked on me. A waiter who wasn't supposed to matter. A man who should have been invisible. But now, I was the center of the story. The bride's jaw dropped, her lips parting in disbelief. She looked less like a glowing bride and more like a cornered animal. Her smile had evaporated, replaced by raw fury. The groom stood stiff, his face pale, his body trembling as though he already knew what was about to unfold. The officiant blinked at me, stunned, his voice caught in his throat. "Excuse me, sir?" he finally managed, his tone shaky, unsure. But I didn't back down. My heart thundered in my chest, my palms were slick with sweat, but my voice was steady. "This wedding can't go on," I said again, louder this time. Gasps spread through the crowd like wildfire. Mothers clutched their pearls, children leaned forward wide-eyed, and whispers surged from every row. "Who is he? What's he doing? Why would a waiter stop a wedding?" The bride snapped out of her shock and stepped forward, her gown dragging across the floor, her voice sharp as broken glass. "How dare you! Get him out of here right now!" 2 groomsmen started moving toward me, but the groom raised a shaky hand to stop them. His face was drenched in sweat, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. The bride spun to him, her voice dripping with outrage. "Why are you letting this happen? Tell him to leave!" But the groom didn't speak. He just stood there, silent, staring at me like a man who had seen a ghost. The hall buzzed with noise now, guests arguing, speculating, whispering. The bride's parents rose to their feet, furious and confused. The tension was unbearable, every second stretching longer than the last. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, but I didn't stop. "You all need to know the truth. This marriage," my voice cracked, but I forced it out. "This marriage is built on lies." The words exploded into the room. Guests gasped, shouted. Some even stood up in shock. The bride screamed, "Lies, all lies!" But her voice shook with panic. I took another step forward, my tray clattering as I set it down on a nearby table. I wasn't hiding behind the role of a waiter anymore. I wasn't just a background shadow. I was here to be heard. The bride's face twisted into rage, her eyes blazing. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're nothing but a bitter nobody trying to ruin my day." But her fury only made the guests more suspicious. The whispers grew louder. "What lies? What's he talking about? Does he know her? What's going on?" The officiant raised his hands, his voice trembling. "Please, sir, if you have something to say it clearly. This is highly irregular, but—" He hesitated, glancing at the groom's pale, trembling figure. "It seems we need to hear it." The bride screamed, her voice echoing through the hall. "No, he has no right. This is my wedding, and I won't let him ruin it." But the groom's silence spoke louder than her screams. His eyes were locked on me, filled with a mixture of recognition, fear, and something else. Guilt. That was when I knew. Everyone in this hall was about to hear the truth I had carried for years. I drew in a sharp breath, feeling my chest burn with the weight of it all. And with every eye locked on me, I opened my mouth to speak. The moment I opened my mouth, the hall shifted. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, tense, buzzing like electricity in the air. Every eye in the room locked on me, waiting, demanding, desperate to know what I meant. I could feel my pulse in my throat. My palms were slick. But I forced the words out. "This marriage isn't what it looks like. It's not love. It's not truth. It's a lie." Gasps exploded across the room. Guests clutched their seats. Some stood halfway up, torn between disbelief and outrage. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God!" and another mutter, "He knows something." The bride's face twisted with fury. "Stop it!" she shrieked, her voice breaking. "You don't know anything, you don't belong here!" But her panic betrayed her. Everyone saw it. Her carefully built mask of perfection cracked, and underneath was fear. The groom stared at the floor, motionless, his hands shaking at his sides. Sweat ran down his temple. His silence was louder than any denial. I took another step forward, my voice steadying with every word. "You can dress it up with flowers, music, and vows, but underneath it's still a lie, and the people here deserve to know the truth before it's too late." The guests broke into chaos, some shouting at me to leave, others yelling at the couple for answers. The officiant looked completely lost, his book trembling in his hands. The bride spun toward the groom, grabbing his arm, her voice desperate. "Say something. Tell them he's lying, please." But he didn't speak. His lips parted, but nothing came out. His silence was damning. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized he wasn't going to save her. Not this time. She turned back to me, her voice sharp, furious. "You think you're powerful because you're ruining this moment? You're nobody, just a waiter. You'll be forgotten the second you walk out that door." Her words cut, but they didn't break me. Not anymore. I lifted my chin, standing taller than I ever had in that uniform. "Maybe I am just a waiter to you, but today I'm the one telling the truth, and nothing you say can bury it anymore." The guests erupted again, divided, some defending her, others siding with me. A woman shouted, "If it's lies, prove it!" A man near the back yelled, "We deserve answers!" The officiant tried to raise his hands, his voice shaking. "Please, everyone, calm down!" But the hall was a storm now, fueled by betrayal and suspicion. And still the groom said nothing. His silence carved through the chaos like a blade. The bride's face crumbled. She clung to his sleeve, her voice breaking into sobs. "Please, don't let him do this to me. Don't let him take everything away." But when he finally looked up, his eyes weren't filled with love. They were filled with shame. That was when the whispers turned into certainty. The truth was no longer a question. It was standing right in front of them. And I knew then, this was only the beginning, because the truth I was about to spill was going to burn the entire room down. The hall was a storm of whispers, gasps, and arguments. The perfect wedding had collapsed into chaos within minutes, and all because I refused to stay silent. The bride stood trembling at the altar, her gown shining under the lights, but her face, once flawless and admired, was twisted in rage and fear. Her makeup had begun to smudge from the heat of the moment, and her hands shook as she pointed at me. "He's lying!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "He's nothing! Just a bitter man trying to ruin my wedding!" But her desperation was showing. People could hear it in her tone, see it in her trembling. Guests weren't convinced. They turned to one another, whispering fiercely. "If he's lying, why isn't the groom denying it? Why is she so afraid?" The groom stood like a statue, his shoulders sagging, his face pale as a ghost. His silence screamed louder than her protests. He couldn't look at her. He couldn't look at me. Finally, a voice from the crowd broke through. "What truth are you talking about?" a man shouted. "If you're going to interrupt a wedding, then say it." Dozens of heads nodded in agreement. They were no longer just spectators at a wedding. They were an audience hungry for the real story. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me. My voice didn't shake this time. "You all deserve to know. I wasn't just a waiter today. I wasn't just someone passing through. I was part of her past." The room gasped in unison, a sharp intake of air that echoed against the walls. The bride's knees buckled, and she stumbled back, clutching the groom's arm. "That's not true," she cried out, her words spilling fast, frantic. "He's obsessed. He's making this up." But her tears and panic only fueled the doubt spreading like wildfire. I stepped closer, my voice louder now, strong. Years ago, before this wedding, before the perfect dress, before the pictures, She and I were together. She promised me forever. She promised me loyalty. But when I was no longer convenient, she betrayed me. The bride's sobs echoed across the hall, but the gasps of the guests drowned her out. Some clutched their chests in disbelief. Others shook their heads in disgust. And then I turned to the groom. My words cut sharper now. "And you knew, didn't you?" The groom finally lifted his head. His eyes glistened with tears, his lips trembling. He looked at me, then at her, and then back at the sea of guests staring at him. He opened his mouth but couldn't speak. That silence, heavy, crushing, was all the answer anyone needed. The bride screamed again, her voice shrill, desperate. "No, don't listen to him, he's twisting everything." She clung to her groom, shaking him, pleading with him to defend her. But he didn't. His silence condemned her more than any words could. Gasps turned to shouts. The guests erupted into chaos, some crying out in sympathy, others in anger. Some cursed her name, others looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and respect. The officiant looked horrified, clutching his book like it might protect him from the mess unraveling before his eyes. And through it all, I stood tall, my voice steady, no longer afraid. "This wedding is built on betrayal, and no amount of music, vows, or rings can cover that up." The bride collapsed into the nearest chair, her sobs filling the air. The groom's hands shook violently as he covered his face, as if ashamed to look at anyone at all. The perfect image of a flawless bride and groom had been shattered, ripped apart in front of everyone they knew. And this was just the beginning, because the worst of the truth hadn't even been spoken yet. The bride's sobs filled the hall like a broken siren, her cries sharp and desperate. But the crowd wasn't looking at her anymore. They were staring at me, waiting, demanding, needing the rest of the truth. I felt every heartbeat slam against my ribs, but I didn't waver. For years, I had carried this secret like a chain, and now, in front of hundreds of people, I was breaking it. I took a step closer to the altar. My voice was low at first, but steady. She wasn't always who she pretends to be. Before all this, she and I were together. She told me I was her forever. She promised me loyalty, honesty, love. I believed her. I gave her everything. Gasps rippled through the guests. A woman covered her mouth in shock. A man muttered under his breath, "Oh my God!" The bride's parents sat stiff in their seats, their faces pale, their eyes wide with humiliation. The bride lunged forward, her tears streaking down her face. "Stop, you're twisting everything. He's making it sound worse than it was." Her voice cracked, but nobody believed her. Not anymore. I pressed on, my voice rising over her sobs. And then, when I was no longer enough for her, she threw me away. She left me. She walked away without a second thought. And she didn't just leave me, she ran to him. I pointed at the groom. The room erupted again. Gasps, whispers, shouts. Everyone turned to him now, the man who stood pale, sweating, and broken at the altar. The bride shook her head violently, clinging to his sleeve. No, don't listen. He's obsessed with me. He's lying. He's trying to ruin this." But the groom's silence was deafening. He couldn't meet anyone's eyes. His shoulders sagged, his head hung low. That silence told the truth louder than I ever could. The officiant stammered, his voice trembling. Is this true?" The bride screamed, "No!" But her voice was drowned by the sea of whispers. Everyone was waiting for the groom to speak. Finally, he lifted his head. His lips trembled, his chest heaved, and when he spoke, his voice was hollow. "I knew." The bride gasped like she had been stabbed. She collapsed against him, shaking her head in horror. "No, don't say that. Please don't." But it was too late. The guests exploded. Some cursed. Some shouted. Some cried. The perfect illusion had shattered completely, leaving nothing but betrayal and shame in its place. The bride sobbed uncontrollably now, clawing at her groom's chest. You can't admit that. Please, don't do this to me." But the groom pushed her hands away, his face twisted with pain. "I can't hide it anymore. I can't keep living like this." The hall buzzed with outrage. People stood from their seats, pointing, whispering, arguing. The once celebratory wedding was now a courtroom of judgment, and the bride was guilty in every eye. I felt something shift inside me. For so long I had been powerless. I had been silenced. But now, standing in front of all of them, with the truth finally spoken, I wasn't the invisible waiter anymore. I was the man who refused to be erased. The bride collapsed to the floor, her sobs shaking her body. Her veil slipped away, her mascara streaked, her image of perfection destroyed. The groom turned away from her, burying his face in his hands. He looked broken, shattered, torn between guilt and relief. And me? I stood taller than I ever had before. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Because as much as the truth had hurt, there was still more buried in silence. And what came next would tear the last pieces of their world apart. The wedding hall was no longer a place of celebration. It had become a battlefield. Guests who once smiled politely now whispered furiously, pointing fingers, shaking heads, and demanding answers. The atmosphere was thick with shock, betrayal, and the sour taste of humiliation. The bride was on the floor, her gown tangled around her, her makeup smeared into a mask of panic. She wasn't the flawless bride everyone had admired minutes ago. She looked shattered, broken under the weight of her own secrets. The groom stood frozen at the altar, his head bowed, his hands trembling. His silence had already betrayed him, and when he admitted he knew, it was the final nail in the coffin. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was complicit. Guests turned on them both. "I can't believe this," a woman whispered loudly enough for the entire row to hear. "She lied to him. She lied to all of us," another spat. "This marriage is a sham," someone shouted from the back. The bride clutched the groom's leg, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, please don't let them do this to me. Don't let them turn against us." But her words didn't matter anymore. The crowd had already made up its mind. The flawless bride had fallen, and no one was coming to lift her up. Her parents hid their faces, humiliated beyond words. Her bridesmaids stood stiffly, their bouquets dangling awkwardly, not daring to step forward. Even the groomsmen shifted uncomfortably, torn between loyalty and disgust. I watched all of it unfold, my chest heaving. For years I had been nothing more than a shadow in her story. Now she was the one standing in the shadows of her own destruction. The groom finally spoke, his voice low but shaking. "Why didn't you just tell me?" The bride looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Because I knew you'd leave me. I knew if you found out, everything would be over." Her words silenced the room. They weren't the words of an innocent woman. They were the confession of someone who had built her life on fear and control. The groom shook his head slowly, his jaw clenched. "So instead you lied to me. You built this day on lies. You let me stand here in front of everyone, promising forever, while you hid the truth." His voice cracked on the last word. The pain in it was undeniable. The bride sobbed harder, clawing at his sleeve. "But I chose you. I picked you in the end. Doesn't that mean anything?" The crowd erupted again, some scoffing at her excuses, others muttering angrily under their breath. I stepped forward, my voice steady, cutting through the chaos. "You didn't choose him. You used him, just like you used me. And now, everyone can finally see it." The bride spun toward me, her face twisted in rage and despair. "You ruined me. You couldn't just let me have this. You couldn't let me be happy." But I didn't flinch. Happiness built on lies isn't happiness. It's a ticking bomb. And today, it exploded. The groom closed his eyes, his chest heaving as though the weight of every word was crushing him. When he looked at her again, his face was hollow, torn. "I loved you," he whispered, barely audible. "But I don't even know who you are anymore." The bride screamed, raw and broken, collapsing against the altar steps. Her cries filled the hall, but they didn't inspire pity. Not anymore. For the first time in years, I felt taller, stronger. I wasn't the invisible one anymore. I was the one standing while she fell. And yet, even as her world crumbled, I knew the story wasn't finished. Because the groom hadn't made his final choice. Not yet. And the decision he was about to make would end everything. The hall was a storm, chaos swirling in every corner. Guests argued in heated whispers, some too shocked to speak at all. The once beautiful wedding had transformed into a public trial, and everyone knew who was guilty. The bride sat slumped at the base of the altar, her gown spread around her like a broken curtain. Her veil was gone, her makeup smeared into black streaks, her sobs uncontrolled. The perfect bride who had walked in minutes ago was gone. In her place sat a woman exposed, humiliated, and desperate. The groom stood above her, trembling, his face pale. His silence had already betrayed him, but the question still lingered in the room, pressing harder with every passing second. What will he do now? The bride clawed at his sleeve, her voice cracking through her sobs. "Please, don't let this destroy us! Don't let them turn you against me! You promised me forever! You promised!" Her words echoed, clinging to the walls. But instead of sympathy, the crowd responded with harsh whispers. "She's manipulative. She tricked him. She doesn't deserve his forgiveness." The groom closed his eyes, his jaw clenched, his chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. "I promised you forever," he said finally, his voice low, broken. "But you didn't promise me the truth." The bride gasped like the words had struck her. She shook her head violently, grabbing both of his hands, forcing him to look at her. "I did it because I love you. I chose you in the end. That's all that should matter." But the guests weren't buying it. Their murmurs grew louder, harsher. The image of the perfect bride was gone for good. I stepped forward, my voice firm, cutting through the noise. Love isn't about choosing someone at the end. It's about being honest from the start. And you've been lying from the beginning. Her eyes shot to me, blazing with hatred. "You don't get to speak about love. You don't get to decide what my story is." But I didn't flinch. I stood tall, my voice steady. "Your story isn't yours alone. You dragged me into it. You dragged him into it, and now everyone here deserves to see who you really are." The bride's screams turned into pleading cries, her voice raw. "Please, please don't do this to me. I just wanted to be happy." The groom turned away, his hands pressed against his face. He looked broken, torn between the woman he thought he loved and the truth staring him down. The officiant, pale and trembling, finally closed his book and stepped back. His silence was an admission. This wedding was no longer his to guide. The crowd leaned in, hungry for resolution. Their eyes weren't on me anymore. They weren't even on the bride. They were on him, the groom, the man who held the final decision in his hands. He pulled his hands from his face and looked at her one last time. His eyes were hollow, his voice hoarse. "I don't even recognize you anymore." The bride collapsed, screaming, pounding her fists against the floor. Her cries filled the hall, but they sounded less like grief and more like defeat. And in that moment, the last piece of her carefully constructed image crumbled. She wasn't a bride anymore. She was a woman exposed. Every lie, every betrayal, every mask ripped away. And still, the question hung heavy in the air. What would the groom do? Because the choice he was about to make would end everything. The hall was no longer alive with music and laughter. It was suffocatingly still, like the air before a storm. The guests sat frozen, their whispers silenced, every eye fixed on the front of the room. The bride's sobs echoed against the high walls, sharp and desperate, but no one moved to comfort her. The groom stood rigid at the altar, pale as a ghost. his chest heaving as though he was drowning in the weight of the truth. And me. I felt the eyes of the entire room burn into me, the invisible man who had become the center of their perfect disaster. Then it happened. The waiter, that was me, stepped forward again. Not with a tray, not with a forced smile, but with the kind of raw truth no one expected to hear at a wedding. My voice cut through the stillness like a blade. This ceremony has to stop. Gasps broke the silence. Guests shifted in their seats, some gripping the arms of their chairs, others clutching their partner's hands. The officiant froze mid-sentence, his book trembling in his hands. The bride whipped her head toward me, her face red with fury, her tears staining the white lace of her gown. "How dare you!" she screamed. "You don't belong here! This is my wedding! You can't do this!" But her rage wasn't convincing anymore. Everyone could see the fear in her eyes, the way her voice cracked, the way her hands shook. The groom's lips parted, his face ashen. "Please, don't," he whispered, barely audible, but enough for those near him to hear. And then I said the words that turned the entire hall against them both. They deserve to know the truth. The bride screamed again, lunging toward me, her gown tangling around her legs. Two groomsmen caught her, holding her back as she thrashed, her voice hoarse with panic. "Shut up, stop it! You can't ruin me like this!" But the crowd wasn't on her side anymore. Their whispers grew louder, harsher. What truth? What's he hiding? She's terrified. He knows something real. The officiant stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Sir, if you have something to say, then speak it now, clearly." The bride shrieked in protest, her voice cracking. "No, he's lying. He's obsessed with me. He's bitter. He wants to destroy everything." But the groom didn't echo her words. He didn't defend her. He just stood there, silent, his face twisted in shame. And that silence was louder than any confession. I took a breath, my body trembling, my throat tight, but my voice carried. "You want to believe this day is about love. You want to believe in a fairy tale. But this marriage is built on lies, and I won't stand by and let it happen." Gasps and murmurs exploded again, the tension unbearable. The bride screamed in fury, her voice raw. "No, don't listen to him! Don't you dare listen to him!" But her pleas only deepened the crowd's suspicion. The groom finally lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine. They were full of guilt, full of recognition, full of the weight of everything unsaid. In that moment, every eye turned to me. The guests leaned in, waiting, holding their breath. The bride sobbed, the groom trembled, and the hall was a cage of silence about to crack. I drew in a sharp breath. My hands shook, my heart pounded, but I forced the words out. And then, with every eye on me, I spoke the words that shattered their world. The silence was unbearable. The entire hall leaned forward, hundreds of eyes piercing through me, waiting for the next words. My chest burned, my throat felt tight. But I spoke anyway. "You want to know the truth?" I said, my voice steady but heavy. "I'm not just a waiter here today. I'm not some stranger crashing a wedding. I was part of her past." The words hit the room like a bomb. Gasps filled the air, sharp and loud. Some guests clutched their mouths in disbelief, others turned wide-eyed to the bride. The bride staggered back, her knees nearly buckling. "No!" she shrieked. "He's lying! He's obsessed with me! He doesn't know what he's talking about!" But her protests only made her look more desperate. I stepped forward, every eye tracking me. "Years ago, before this day, before that dress, before this performance, you and I were together. You told me I was your forever. You told me I was the one, and I believed you. Until the day you betrayed me!" The bride screamed, covering her ears, shaking her head violently. "No, no, don't listen to him! He's twisting everything!" But the whispers spreading across the room told a different story. Guests exchanged looks, their faces twisted in disgust. She lied. She cheated. She played them both. The groom's face turned ghostly pale. His chest rose and fell in heavy breaths, his lips trembling. He looked at her, then at me, then at the crowd, his silence damning him more than words ever could. I pointed at him, my voice cutting through the chaos. "And you? You knew, didn't you?" The groom froze, his hands shaking at his sides. His lips parted, but nothing came out. The bride lunged toward him, gripping his arm with both hands, pleading through her sobs. "Say something. Tell them it's not true, please!" But he didn't. That silence was all the answer anyone needed. The bride's screams grew frantic. "Stop it! Stop! He's trying to destroy us! Please don't let him do this to us!" But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. They were turning, their whispers sharpening into accusations. She lied to him. She played them both. What kind of marriage starts like this? The officiant looked horrified, clutching his book to his chest. He stammered, "Sir, is this true?" But the question didn't matter. Everyone already knew. The groom finally spoke. His voice was hollow, broken. "I knew." The hall erupted. Gasps, shouts, anger, disgust. Chaos tore through the room. Some guests stood in outrage, others sank back into their chairs, shaking their heads. The bride collapsed against the groom's chest, sobbing hysterically. "Why would you admit that? Why would you do this to me?" But he pushed her away, his face contorted with shame. "Because I can't live with the lies anymore." The guests divided quickly, some glaring at the bride with contempt, others glaring at the groom for staying silent so long. Voices clashed, arguments broke out, and the once perfect ceremony had turned into a courtroom without a judge. The bride screamed, pounding her fists against the floor. "You're destroying me, both of you!" But no one came to her defense. Not her bridesmaids, not her parents, not even her groom. I stood tall, my chest heaving, my hands trembling but steady enough to hold the truth at last. For years I had been powerless, silenced, forgotten, but not anymore. "You all needed to know," I said firmly. "You deserve to know the truth before vows were made and a life built on lies began." The bride's sobs filled the hall, raw and broken. The groom stood hollow, his face pale, his shoulders slumped under the weight of guilt. The crowd murmured louder, the judgment heavy in the air. But as I stood there, reclaiming the voice I'd lost for years, I realized something chilling. The worst part wasn't what I had said. The worst part was what the groom admitted next. The hall was chaos, shouts, whispers, gasps echoing like waves crashing against the walls. But through all the noise, one image stood out. The bride collapsed on the floor, her perfect gown rumpled and stained with tears, her veil torn away, her sobs uncontrollable. Minutes ago she had been the picture of grace and beauty. Now she was shattered. Guests who had once admired her turned cold. Their whispers sliced through the air. She fooled us all. I can't believe she stood there lying. What a disgrace! Her friends sat stiff in their seats, their faces red with embarrassment. Her parents covered their eyes, unable to bear the shame. No one reached for her. No one comforted her. She was utterly alone. The groom stood frozen, staring at her with a mix of heartbreak and disgust. His silence had already condemned him, but hers was worse. Her lies had destroyed them both. Finally, his voice cut through the noise. Low, shaking, broken. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" The bride lifted her tear-stained face, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Because I knew you'd leave me. I knew if you found out, this day, everything would be over." Her words silenced the room. They weren't excuses. They were confessions. The groom's shoulders slumped, his voice sharp with pain. "So instead, you let me walk into this. You let me stand here in front of everyone, vowing forever, while you built it all on lies." Her sobs grew frantic. She crawled toward him on her knees, clutching at his suit. "I love you. I chose you. Isn't that enough?" But the crowd's whispers said what he couldn't. No, it's not enough. Love without truth isn't love. I stepped forward, my voice steady, cutting through her pleas. You didn't choose him. You used him, just like you used me, and now everyone can see it. The bride spun toward me, her face twisted in rage, her voice raw. You ruined me. You couldn't let me be happy. You couldn't let me have this. But I didn't flinch. I stood taller, my voice calm but firm. You ruined yourself. Happiness built on lies always collapses. Today, it collapsed in front of everyone. Her cries turned hysterical. She clawed at the floor, her body trembling. Her perfect image was gone, forever replaced by the picture of a woman undone by her own choices. The groom looked down at her, his face pale, his hands trembling. I loved you, he whispered, but I don't even recognize you anymore. Her screams filled the hall. No, please, don't leave me. I can fix this. I can fix everything. But her words were empty. Even she didn't believe them anymore. The guests shook their heads, some glaring at her, others looking away as if they couldn't bear to watch. The once envied bride was now a warning, her fall from grace complete. And me? For the first time in years, I felt tall, strong, no longer invisible. I wasn't the man she had erased. I was the man who had exposed the truth. But as powerful as that felt, the story wasn't over, because the groom hadn't made his final choice yet. He was still standing at the edge of a decision that would end everything. And the next words out of his mouth would seal all of our fates. The hall was silent again, but this silence felt different, heavier, final. Guests sat frozen in their seats, their eyes glued to the groom. The bride was collapsed at his feet, clutching at his suit, sobbing, begging, but his face was unreadable, torn between love and betrayal, between who she was and who she had pretended to be. His lips parted, his voice shaking as he whispered, I can't do this. The words cut through the air like a blade. Gasps erupted across the room. Mothers clutched their children, fathers muttered curses under their breath, and friends stared in disbelief. The bride shook her head violently, her sobs turning frantic. No, you don't mean that. You love me. You promised me forever. The groom stepped back, her hands slipping from his suit. His eyes were glassy, his voice hollow. I promised forever to the person I thought you were, but that person never existed. The crowd erupted into whispers again, louder this time. The perfect wedding had died before their eyes. The bride collapsed against the floor, her sobs turning into screams. Don't leave me! Please! We can fix this! I'll do anything! But no one moved to help her. Not her bridesmaids, not her parents, not even her groom. The officiant closed his book, his hands trembling. His role was over. The ceremony was finished. The groom turned away, his shoulders sagging under the weight of it all. This wedding is over. There's nothing left to save. The hall buzzed with shock. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some shaking their heads, others whispering harsh judgments. What had been planned as the happiest day of her life had become her public downfall. The bride screamed again, her voice hoarse, desperate. No, you can't do this to me, not in front of everyone. But that was the truth. Her mask hadn't just slipped. It had shattered. And now there was no putting it back together. I watched it unfold, my chest heaving. For years, I had carried the weight of silence. For years, I had been erased from her story. But now I stood in the middle of the hall, no longer invisible, no longer powerless. The guests looked at me differently. Not as a waiter, not as a nobody, but as the man who had spoken the truth when no one else would. I set the tray down on a table, wiped my palms against my jacket, and took one last look at the chaos I had unleashed. The bride was on the floor, broken. The groom walked away, hollow but free. The guests whispered and pointed, their once envied couple now reduced to scandal and shame. And me? I felt something I hadn't in years. Dignity, closure, freedom. As I turned to leave, I realized something important. Hadn't just stopped a wedding. I had reclaimed my life. Because in the end, this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about respect. The respect I had finally given myself. It was about humility, the lesson she never learned until it was too late. And it was about karma, the truth that no lie, no matter how beautiful, can stay hidden forever. And as I walked out of that hall, I realized I hadn't just stopped a wedding. I had reclaimed my life. If this story left you speechless, imagine what's coming next. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the twists and truths in the stories ahead. Hit the like button if you believe that honesty always finds its way to light. And share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were in that hall?